What are the origins of political correctness in the UK?
Well, there are two answers to that. I think the short answer is, first of all, it derives from the 1960s and from the University of California. It derived from the Berkeley campus of the University of California, and it gradually extended across almost all of the Western world. I think Protestant countries are particularly susceptible to it because of the guilt complex that's inbuilt into Calvinism and Presbyterianism. And therefore this is why, although it extends to Catholic countries as well as to Protestant ones, it's more deep-seated in Northern Europe and in America and in Australia and Canada than in, for instance, France, Italy and Spain.
So are you suggesting then that it's an American phenomenon?
I think the short answer is that it is, yes, but I am led to understand that the term was first used by Trotsky in the 1920s, and it comes into early Leninist speeches as well, and it was then taken up, of course, by the Maoists as well. And so generally it is a term with a very reprehensible pedigree, and I wish people understood that a little bit better.
Regarding political correctness, how do British Conservatives deal with it?
Conservatives in the UK deal with it in several different ways. The instinctive, automatic way is to grumble about it and to laugh at it. I think this is a rather unsatisfactory way of dealing with it, because the danger of PC is that it's so ridiculous to talk about, for instance, personholes rather than manholes, waitrons rather than waitresses, and firefighters rather than firemen. All this sort of stuff. I mean, it's so ridiculous that the temptation is just to laugh at it and just walk away. The difficulty is that because it's so ludicrous, it makes headway. People don't take it seriously. People used to laugh at Hitler, and he made headway. They laughed at his stupid little moustache and all the rest of it. The same thing happens with PC. It's a bit like a clown with a knife. It's something that's very, very sinister, but also rather comical. So the instinctive Conservative reaction is to laugh at it. The instinctive reaction of Conservative rank and file members is to either reject it angrily or to laugh at it. And the reaction of the Conservative hierarchy is to completely accept it and go along with it in every possible way, if anything, to be more egregiously PC than their Labour opponents.
What are the chief anti-PC forces?
Well, the chief anti-force is probably the instincts of British people. British people, for the most part, are like people in most countries. They're instinctively small C conservatives. They believe in their country, they believe in their families, they believe in traditional sexual roles and all these sorts of things. They believe that people shouldn't get paid for not working, etc. All these things that people took for granted, everyone took for granted until about 5 minutes ago. I think that's the chief cultural obstacle to the advance of PC. And that's helped by the institutions that we have in the country, which are inherently traditionalist and, if you like, a conservative force like the monarchy, most obviously, but also the way our parliamentary system works. And then you've got the newspapers. You've got some very, very good print media in Britain. You've got the excellent columnists, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, Daily Express, and the Sun, most particularly. But you can get good columns in all these newspapers, and they act as quite a brake. The Daily Mail particularly is a very powerful force. Not always, it can have a slightly schizophrenic relationship, I think, with PC. On the one hand, it will make very, very strong right-wing arguments on social matters. On the other hand, it will sort of backpedal a bit and denounce people who try to be too right-wing. It's a rather strange, schizophrenic newspaper. But nevertheless, for overall, its effect is a good one, and it does slow down the onward rush of PC to some extent.
Are you aware of any American alternative or component to resisting PC?
Well, I think there are a lot of very, very fine, well-educated and well-informed American people who do their bit. You've got websites like Alternative Right. You've got a plethora of publications, more so than in the UK, I think, in many ways. I think the conservative movement in the US is more intellectual overall. It's more interested in ideas. It's got a wider view of things in some strange ways. In Britain, because we take things on trust, we take things for granted a bit more, I think, than in the US. And as a result of this, there's more thought given to political currents of all kinds. There are more think tanks here on both sides of the equation. There are more publications. There are more people willing to give money to think tanks than there are in the UK. Anyone who's ever tried to do any kind of political think tankery in the United Kingdom is always up against money. You're scratching around for hundreds of pounds. Whereas in the US, most people can get reasonable subsidy from well-informed, civilized people.
How would you say the media cultural climate has changed in recent years?
I think in Europe it's changed a lot since, as it has in the United States, I think, as well, ever since 9/11. I think that was really what you call a wake-up call. That really made a big difference to the media discussion. Because prior to 9/11, the discussion of Islam and immigration was almost non-existent in the British media, despite their good conservative instincts. They thought it really didn't matter. They didn't think it was an important subject at all. And so discussion of that was confined to the furthest fringes of the right, parties like the National Front, as it was, and which then became the BNP. They were the only people who were at one point talking about immigration. But since 9/11, and even more so since our own bombings of July 2005, there's been an awful lot of mainstream commentary about Islam and immigration, which until really very recently would have been almost completely a product of the loony right, if you like. And now it's become very mainstream. It's quite surprising to open up a newspaper and see a former Archbishop of Canterbury chairing a group called the Balanced Migration, for instance, something in which he never showed any interest when he was the Archbishop, but now he's really very active. There's a very good think tank called Migration Watch UK. There are lots of good articles in newspapers, even sometimes in the Observer, the Guardian, and the Independent, the left-wing papers.
Is it too late to repair the damage third world immigration has done to the UK?
Well, I think it's easy to say that. I think there's a great temptation amongst conservative-minded people, in a way, almost to want to have lost. There's a sort of Gothic sensibility amongst many people in the conservative movement in all countries, I think. They want to believe, après moi le déluge, and I'm the last of my type, and it's this sort of the same idea that motivates a film like The Last Man on Earth. It's an exciting, romantic image of wanting to be defeated almost. And I think that is a funny sort of element on the conservative movement in all countries. And I'm sort of drawn that way myself sometimes. I do sometimes think it would be rather nice to be the last of a certain type. It's like the film The Leopard, based on the novel by Lampedusa, the Sicilian aristocrat who was the last of his line, and he writes about the end of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in 1870, when Italy was united for the first time since the Romans, and how his whole world changed and was completely turned upside down. And it's a book suffused with melancholy and longing and just richness and beauty. And that appeals to conservative-minded people who are naturally melancholic, naturally rather miserable and pessimistic and wanting to fear the worst. There's a book by John Derbyshire called We're All Doomed, and I think that really evokes very well the classic conservative mentality, the paleo-conservative mentality anyhow. The neo-conservatives tend to be much more upbeat and utopian, and this is one of the reasons we dislike them so much, because extraordinarily annoying and naive. It is certainly a very serious issue. It's something that an unavoidable evil that has been allowed to happen by successive governments of both Conservative and Labour politicians. But nevertheless, I think it's very easy to say that it is too late. But even so, even if you take the worst possible figures into account, the British population is roughly 10% ethnic minority. There's a long way to go before the situation cannot be turned around. And I think the other thing that we all sometimes forget is that things can and sometimes do change very quickly under the pressure of events that we can't foresee. And very often they're terrible events, things that nobody would wish, but nevertheless they do have effects. For instance, one could foresee another 9/11 style attack in London, for instance. One would not wish it obviously for a moment, but it could happen tomorrow. It could be happening now for all I know, which could in turn be met with revenge attacks and so forth, and there could be all sorts of horrible implications. So things can turn around for better or for worse very, very quickly. And I think we ought to always remember that when we sit here, wanting to be in love with despair and defeat. Well, if there was to be another big Muslim-style attack in the UK, I think Islam is already under siege to some extent. There are already proposals to ban the burqa in several European countries, and there is a movement now to do the same growing in the UK. Personally, I'm opposed to it, actually. I don't see anything wrong with Islam as a discrete value system. I think it's a perfectly noble tradition in its own right, which has given rise to a great civilization. So I've no particular problem with it. Nevertheless, it does pose particularly difficulties when it comes to the West, not just the modern secular liberal West that everyone talks about and that neoconservatives mean when they mean the West, but even Christendom. It's something that is fundamentally at odds. And if you look back at European history, the history of our confrontation with Islam is an extremely unfortunate one. We tend to only meet them at times of war. They come as oppressors, as invaders, as pirates, and we sometimes do the same to them. So the whole tradition of confrontation between our civilizations has always been a negative one. And that can't be just wished away. And all of those ancient stereotypes from all of European history, because Islamic pirates, for instance, raided the coast of Ireland and southern England. So they've had even Iceland, I think, on one occasion. So they've had to reach much more than just around the Mediterranean basin. And so therefore, every European country has got some kind of folk memory of Islamic subjugation, and more Islamic bombings would feed into that. They would reinforce that and bring all those memories come bubbling back to the surface. As it is in countries like Austria and France and Germany and a lot of the Balkan countries, and Greece in particular, there's deep unease about what's happening already with Kosovo, for instance, and with the increase in Muslim immigration into Europe. And one more bomb in any city, or even a serious attempted bombing attack, would raise all of these things all over again. We've already seen in a lot of European countries, like in Holland and Sweden, in Germany and in Austria, you've seen a sudden upsurge of interest in anti-Islamic politics. And the more restive they become, the more that sentiment will rise to the surface. I think it is inevitable that there will have to be some sort of awful confrontation, and I regret it bitterly, because, as I say, I have no particular beef with Islam. It's a noble tradition in its own right. I don't think it belongs in Europe, and I think many millions of people feel the same way.
Let me ask you this. You're a well-spoken man. You're eloquent. What would you say to a critic who says that all of these fancy words are just a way of hiding a deep-seated racism?
Well, I think my reaction to political correctness is only partly to do with the race angle of it. I mean, I'm opposed to it in all of its manifestations. I think it's ridiculous when it comes to sex. I think it's ridiculous when it comes to sexuality. I think it's ridiculous when it comes to class and all sorts of other things. It is a ridiculous sort of attitude, a sort of pathetic, puritanical, tedious, excruciating, god-awful attitude, and the people who promote it ought to be sort of smacked around the face a bit, or given a good shake. And so it's really, only tangentially to do with race. Race is simply the most obvious way in which it affects our lives, but it affects our lives in lots of different ways. And I'm as opposed to it when it comes to accusations of sexism or homophobia as when it comes to accusations of racism.